We're kicking off today's show with the ongoing shortage of taxis in rural Ireland and the knock-on impact on local communities and businesses, which was raised at a Dáil Transport Committee meeting ahead of the weekend. The Restaurants Association of Ireland, speaking as part of the Taxis for Ireland coalition, outlined how declining taxi numbers are affecting both customers and workers in the hospitality sector, particularly in counties like here in Clare. So to discuss this further, we are joined now by business owners from the local hospitality industry, co-owner of Hotel Woodstock in Ennis, Sean Lally, and from Monk's Restaurant in Ballyvaughan, Patrick O'Donoghue. And lads, thanks very much for joining me on the show. Sean, has there been a decline in taxi availability as far as you can see within Ennis? And if so, has it changed how people socialise, dine at your hotel, or even decide whether to go out at all?
Good morning, Alan. Well, yes, there has been a decrease in numbers of taxi drivers since 2019. It's down between almost 25%, while at the same time the population has increased 8.5%, and that has obviously had a knock-on effect. From an Ennis perspective, on our side of it, it hasn't been a major issue. To be fair, we link in with AAA taxis here in Ennis, and they operate 24/7. So you are going to get a taxi. Obviously, in peak periods, you may have to wait a little while for it. A lot of people have apps on their phones now as well, so they call the Ubers and the whatever the other taxi names are locally that operate in Clare. So or they get lifts or make arrangements. But I suppose before people go for a big night out, they usually have to decide, well, how are we getting home? And it's not kind of, you can't just do it at the drop of a hat. You probably have to plan a little bit more now. So whether there's a designated driver or a friend or a relation that's going to collect them at a kind of particular time. And I certainly see it over the last couple of years that a lot more planning goes into it. But definitely the number of taxis has tightened up over the last number of years. And you can see it on the ground, but it hasn't been a massive issue for us. I believe it's more of a rural area situation, and talking to lots of my colleagues in rural locations around the county, they see it as kind of more of an issue.
Okay, so in that sense then, are you perhaps not seeing many or perhaps any customers leaving earlier, cancelling bookings for meals at the hotel, or deciding not to even stay overnight because they can't get home safely? They do have options.
No, I haven't seen anyone cancelling bookings. On occasions, I have seen people maybe leave events a little bit earlier than the normal because they have a lift arranged. But I know, I suppose, from talking to a couple of taxi drivers that own companies, they would have issues with maybe unregulated drivers that are in the system that are causing issues and maybe not 100% safe to take those lifts home. They would also have issues as well. There was a number of bus companies that may be subsidised, whereas they're and not carrying the numbers of people that they should be, while the majority of those people would want to take taxis. So maybe there's a way of looking at the subsidies side of things to see, can you encourage more people to go into taxi drivers? Because obviously if you're down a quarter in the last 5 years, there's obviously something not going right about the industry, and it needs to be looked at to see how you can turn that figure around. I know from the Restaurant Associations and the Vintners Federation of Ireland that they're calling for a 30% increase by 2027, which will take a bit of work.
Okay, Patrick, just to bring you in, I mean, you're in Ballyvaughan, small village, public transport limited. Are taxis and the availability of taxis limited, or perhaps with the apps that Sean mentioned, maybe not as much? And how critical are taxis to keeping your restaurant and indeed the wider community functioning?
Good morning, Alan. Yes, well, our experience up here in the tourist area is a little bit different than those in more rural areas, because currently, we have adapted to what we have to take on, and that was the change in all of people's social circumstances, and with regulations coming in about the driving and about so people have adapted to new habits. They're coming out earlier, they're designating a driver, they are making sure that people are getting home, so we are adapting to that. But that doesn't mean that the taxis are still not here. They're still here. We're very lucky up here in North Clare. We've got a super bus service that runs 15 times a day through our village. People are adapting to that. They're getting the bus. We have a tourist economy up here, and we've got a couple of taxi drivers that are working here all the time. But we're reliant on them. They're reliant on the tourist industry to keep their heads above water, because running a taxi island is not cheap, as you know yourself. I mean, the costs across the board are extortionately high for them. So for them to make some money, they're relying on the tourists, they're relying on the rural communities. But you know what? We're adapting. We're getting there. So, we are getting there.
Yeah, I mean, we recently spoke with Egan's and Liscannor of their courtesy car initiative, and it seems to be something that publicans are perhaps doing more in rural areas, and it was heard at the committee. Is that something you've witnessed or experienced, or perhaps more and more pubs/restaurants are beginning to do that to make sure that they can keep the customers coming and that they have an option to get home and get in?
Well, I think that if there is a taxi system available for the local publicans, that they're able to use that they know that if they ring the taxi driver, the driver is available to come and collect their punters or bring them home, or even bring them to the establishment in the first place. So once that relationship has been built up, which we have here, and again, as I said at the very start, we're very lucky to have that around here, especially in a tourist area. But if that relationship is established, well, then there's a consistency of business. But of course, the publican cannot establish that relationship if there isn't availability of taxis in the area, which is a problem in other rural areas. So how do you incentivize taxis to become involved in the business in rural areas? As Sean said there, maybe they should be subsidised. Maybe there should be a little bit of help on the insurance, on their vehicle purchase price, on their fuel price. If these guys are going to provide a service in rural Ireland, they should be compensated to try and make that work for them financially, because relying on rural industry on its own without anything else won't sustain them for the quieter months or the quieter nights during the week. So maybe some help from the government would be a welcome addition.
I'm just wondering as well, Sean, about staff, whether, how difficult it potentially has become for workers to get home after late shifts. Maybe it's less of an issue for yourselves, given where you're located. And I'm thinking more maybe younger staff members, those, part-timers who maybe aren't driving yet. Although from what you were saying, it sounds like perhaps, they do have options. But has it at any stages caused you difficulties with staffing and getting home after late shifts?
No, to be fair, Alan, it hasn't been an issue for us. At this stage, the majority of the people we have employed have actually cars, and they're able to make their own way home, or else they have elder brothers and sisters that are working with us that are on kind of the same shifts if they're young, and they get left home with them. So we're actually lucky, but I can see that being more of an issue in the rural locations. So yeah, that there's no doubt there's an issue. The government probably need to look at the different regulations that are there in the whole taxi industry. I know that there's quite a strict geography exam that has to be done before they actually become a taxi. Now, that's probably less of an issue nowadays, when you look at the amount of stuff that's on an iPhone, and you can literally,
use Google Maps or whatever.
So that's all there. And I know they have extended out the age limit of a car from 10 to 11 years to allow it to continue as a taxi. So maybe looking at some of the regulations are there could help to get more people into the industry.
Yeah, Patrick, what do you think in terms of the issues that were highlighted on this at the Dáil Transport Committee? I mean, what would you like to see come out of that discussion? As you've said, Ballyvaughan, a tourist destination, so maybe it's not suffering as much as more other rural areas of Clare that aren't as, I suppose, big in terms of attracting tourism, where taxis, there is a lack of taxis, a lack of public transport, and it can be an issue to maintain some sort of nightlife there.
Well, it would be good if we could incentivize them to set up. There are people looking for maybe a tax break on some of the income, if it's an alternative income that you have on top of what you are already doing during your day job. If you decided to do a few hours extra in the evening, or people who are part-time taxi drivers, if we could incentivize them to work those extra few hours, therefore providing a service to the community, maybe to subsidise per trip or per hour that they are actually on call, that they're actually available to turn up or answer the phone when people are looking. If they're going to provide that, maybe in rural Ireland we could incentivise them to, or reduce their insurance. And insurance for a taxi can be extortionately high, from like 5 up to 8,000 euros per annum. Which is like maybe 4, 5, 6 times the average fee that you and I will pay, or give them a fuel rebate on what they use for their taxi, to say that they did 20,000 kilometres taxi mileage this year. Give them a rebate, give them a VAT exemption on the fuel or VRT, something small like that, just to incentivize them to get into the business. And once they get into the business, you never know how long they might stay at it, because if you're amenable to talking to people, and you like doing the driving, and you like meeting tourists and meeting rural people, and listening to the chat and the general talk of life, maybe you could, you'll get to really like it, and you'll do a bit more of it. So a little bit of an incentive from the government might encourage more people to get into the industry.
Yeah, Sean, Patrick has mooted some interesting ideas there, initiatives. As he said, on the face of it, they seem like they would be workable and they would make a great difference to taxi drivers. Would you agree with most or all of those, or have any other suggestions as to what could be done?
I 100% agree with what Patrick said there. That's a great idea. I think if the money is there, it'll draw people into it. And if you can, and it's probably in the evening times, it's a second income for people. But if they're going to be taxed at almost 50%, you're not going to encourage people in there. And it also refers to the whole insurance as well, which is a huge issue in Ireland. So if something could be done on that, or that they're subsidised for the insurance, you may encourage more people in there. And as Patrick says, it's a service to the community, which is very important. And if you get somebody with the right personality who's driving a taxi driver, you can imagine the impact that would have on a tourist who takes that taxi driver. So they go back to their home countries, and they talk about the fantastic attractions and the great country that Ireland is to go on holiday in. Whereas if they couldn't get a taxi, it'd probably have a negative impact on their holiday here in Ireland. So I think it is a service to the community, and it's very important. And we probably need a little bit of blue sky thinking in relation to the industry, and encouraging people to go in there, or maybe look to see what countries in the EU, and I don't know the answer to this, what they are doing to alleviate these issues, because I'm sure they're probably having the same issues as we have, but I don't know the answer to that or what they're doing.
Yeah, Patrick, I wonder, in terms of, as Sean says, blue sky thinking would be very much welcome on this, whether a state-run NTA-operated national taxi app would make a real difference, one that was focused on transparency and also rural access.
Well, like if you look at Uber there, like I think Uber are a very selective business. They're not covering the full area of rural Ireland. Now, financially, it's probably not. They wouldn't be able to cover rural Ireland like that financially. But like, if the government roll out a national taxi system, yeah, the figures of that, I don't know how they would stand up, Alan, or how they would look at, would it be exorbitantly expensive to do that? I think currently, go back to a subsidised system where they're actually self-employed and they're actually working for themselves, yet they get help from the government, is a much better system initially. Because if that works, well then they're responsible for their own work, and yet the government are contributing to help them get over the line financially to make it work for them. So therefore it becomes attractive. Setting up another NTA, National Taxi Association, for the government, I don't know. I think there's enough of those bodies set up around the country already. And I much prefer to see a subsidised system if we could.
Okay, well, interesting ideas. We do have to leave it there, gents. Thanks very much to both of you. Patrick O'Donoghue there from the Monk's Restaurant in Ballyvaughan and co-owner of Hotel Woodstock here in Ennis. Sean Lally